What is up, everyone? Ken, also known as Wiltshire here, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be making the Dell Optiplex 3040 look like a gaming computer. In the last episode or video I made, we resurrected the Dell Optiplex 3040 and we made it perform like a gaming computer, but now it needs to look to play the part of a gaming computer. And what I mean by that is we'll be modifying the ever-loving heck out of this Dell Optiplex 3040 case. And I'm going to start by doing a small cut in the side panel of the Dell Optiplex 3040. And by small, I mean actually really quite large. Anything that's on the inside of this tape line here will be cut out. I'm going to put some acrylic or Lexan behind the metal part of the side panel here, just to give a window of the Dell Optiplex 3040, so we can see the inside parts of the computer, just like a gaming computer case. And we'll be doing that with my trusty handy little Dremel here, but we'll also be adding some upgrades to the computer along the way. So we'll be upgrading the proprietary Dell power supply with an SFX power supply. And the SFX power supply I'll be using today is the Corsair SF600. And this is a 600 watt modular power supply, a very tiny but very powerful power supply. The reason why we're upgrading the proprietary one is that that's only 245 watts and it can't really power anything above the RX 470 that's already in there. So we'll be taking the RX 470 out as well, and we'll try to maybe fit a Vega 64, maybe an RX 590, anything that's smaller or shorter than 235 millimeters, because that is the max length that I can get into this computer case. So we'll work on that as the video progresses. We'll also be upgrading the storage from a hard drive to a solid state drive. This is a 500 gigabyte Samsung 860 EVO SSD. And the reason why I'm going with this is because A, it's an SSD, it's way faster than a hard drive, and B, there's no moving parts. So I do have to take the entire hard drive cage as well as the CD drive cage out of this computer case because it collides with the graphics cards that are taller than the RX 470 as well as the new power supply. So I'll be taking all those out, I'll be drilling the rivets out, and then we'll be cutting the side hinge here a little bit shorter so the window has a little bit more you can have a little bit more view of the computer parts through the window. And we'll also be upgrading the RAM to 16 gigabytes. This is an 8 gigabyte stick of RAM, DDR3L to be exact, 1600 megahertz from Timetech. And we'll be upgrading the computer from 8 gigabytes to 16 gigabytes. And we'll also be upgrading the CPU that's in this computer from an i5 to an i7 6700. Now, with that said, before we get into cutting the side panel, I want to take the time out to thank each and every one of you that came from the Supercut Verge build PC video. You guys are absolutely insane. I've gotten 2,400 subscribers in the last 7 days. I'm not used to that many people coming over to my channel and subscribing. So again, thank you very much. I'm not used to this. I don't really know what to say other than thank you. I hope you guys stick around and watch the future content. Hope you guys like this video. With that said, we're going to get into cutting the side panel of the Dell Optiplex 3040 and adding a window to it. With the side panel cut, I cleaned it up off camera here. I took the tape off, cleaned it up with a little bit of rubbing alcohol, and it actually turned out really good. I took a file to the edges to make sure there's no sharp edges as well on the inside of the window, and I took a black touch-up stick that I had for a car, and I used it on the edge of my cuts here just to cover up the exposed metal from my cuts. Now what we're going to do is we're going to test to see if the side panel is not ruined in terms of structural integrity, and we're going to see if it fits on the Dell Optiplex 3040 case itself. Now you'll notice that there is a black Sharpie mark on the case. I made this mark here before I made the cut of the side panel, and the edge of my side panel right here, all the way along that edge, should line up with that black Sharpie mark. And if it does, then everything is good and my measurements were correct. Now, everything on the left-hand side of that Sharpie mark here is going to be cut away and removed. Everything on the right-hand side all the way along here is going to be kept. And the reason why I need to keep that, obviously, is for the clips for the side panel. They clip into these 3 holes here. And then these 3 larger holes are what the side panel slots into. So we flip this around. You'll notice that there's 3 little clips here on the edge, and those slot into those 3 holes there, and that's how the side panel stays attached to the case. So obviously if I cut those away, then that's not going to fit anymore. But with that said, we're going to do a quick dry run of the side panel here. So again, that Sharpie mark should line up with the edge of my window. I'm trying to do this with one hand. That's not the easiest thing to do in the world. So let's see here if I can line it up. There we go. There we go. And that is how the side panel is going to look once we have everything ready to go on the computer. And as you can see, the black Sharpie mark lines up with the edge of my window, so my measurements were good. So now that I know that everything is good and the structural integrity isn't ruined of the side panel, it's actually pretty sturdy actually still. I'm actually really surprised in how strong that is with such a big cutout. But now that everything is good, we're going to move over to the acrylic, and as you can see, I've already marked out the dimensions of the window here, but I've added about, I would say about maybe an 1/8 overlap of the measurements, make it a little bit thicker or wider, just to make sure we have got a little bit of overlap, so the edges aren't seen of the acrylic when you look through the window on the outside of the computer. So I'm going to cut out the acrylic window. I decided to go with acrylic instead of Lexan or tempered glass because it's cheaper. But now that I know that everything is good with the side panel, we can now go ahead and cut out the acrylic and glue it to the inside of the side panel. The acrylic panel is in the side panel of the computer, and as you can see, it looks really, really good. I'm actually very happy with the results that I got from the side panel mod here. And if we zoom in on the glue line here, you'll see that I just did hot glue all the way around the edge of the acrylic panel, and then that glue adhered to the side panel on the inside there. And it actually worked out very, very well. Now, I haven't been able to check to see if the side panel fits correctly on the computer case itself. Reason being is that there's a raised metal piece on the flap here, and I am going to have to cut the flap off in order to check to see if that fits. And this is the part that I'm absolutely loathing. I'm not looking forward to cutting this because this is a lot thicker than the side panel was, and the side panel took quite a bit of time to cut. So not looking forward to this. I'm gonna have to gut the computer because I don't want any metal shavings on the parts because that will cause shorts if I go to use the computer, of course. So I have to take the power supply out, motherboard out, CPU, all the fans, graphics card, cables, everything. Everything's got to come out, and then we're going to cut the flap all the way down along that line there, and then we'll try the side panel out once I'm finished to see if it actually fits. The flap on the inside of the computer is now completely cut out. As you can see, I have the leftovers of everything that was inside the computer. I drilled out the rivets for both of the hard drive bays, 2.5 inch and 3.5 inch. Those are gone too, so those are left over. I might reuse those in, say, a Macintosh, Hackintosh G5 build, so I can have a hard drive cage. Might use that later on. But I've got the front panel on the computer case, so that worked out great. No problems with the front panel at all. Now we're going to check to see if the windowed side panel does indeed fit on the cut Optiplex 3040. So there we have it. Everything is good. We have a modded windowed Optiplex 3040. So I'm very happy with the results here. I'm very happy with it. And what I'm thinking of doing is maybe painting the inside black, just scuffing it up real good, and then giving it kind of a matte finish black on the inside. One thing I also have is I have a bunch of 60mm and 80mm fans left over from previous projects that never really got used in it. So what I'm thinking of doing, and I'm just going to open this up a little bit, is I'm thinking of putting a fan in the front here. As you can see, I've kind of marked it out already, and maybe one up here, because the default Optiplex 3040 only has an exhaust fan and a CPU fan, so it doesn't really get good airflow and things tend to get very warm on the inside. So if we have some intake fans there and there, we should get a little bit better temps on the inside of the computer. So that is what's going to be next, but I'm very happy with the windowed side panel and the case, of course. That turned out great. So we have a windowed Optiplex 3040 officially, so we're going to cut the fans and then reassemble the computer and upgrade it as we go along. So that is what's on the agenda next. The Dell Optiplex 3040 is finally assembled, and oh my goodness, that took so long to cram, and I mean absolutely just cram everything inside this computer case. And we're about to give the guy a test boot. As you can see, I got my monitor, mouse, and keyboard ready to go to give it a test boot, so fingers crossed, hopefully it works. But before we hit that power button, I'm going to give you guys a walkthrough of how I managed to cram everything inside this computer case and make it work. So you'll notice there's a few components on the table here, so we're going to start off on the right hand side here. So we have the Sapphire RX 470 that was previously inside the computer case. Now I've gone with a different graphics card, and that graphics card that I've gone with is a Zotac GTX 1070 Ti Mini. And the reason why I went with this guy is because it's shorter in length than the RX 470. Now the Zotac is 213 millimeters in length, meanwhile the RX 470 is 230. Now that extra 17 millimeters allowed me to cable manage the computer a lot cleaner in the front panel, running the cables up to the SSD and everything like that. So that was actually a very nice bonus for using a shorter GPU, and it's got more horsepower than the RX 470 does. So with that said, and speaking of component length, let's start next with the CPU cooler. So let's get up and close and personal with it here. So the CPU cooler that I decided to go with for the build was the Arctic Freezer Pro 7, and the main reason for this was due to height clearance. Now I originally tried a Hyper 212 Evo, and that didn't fit. That was a bust. I was actually starting to sweat bullets because I removed the factory standoff screw mounts for the stock CPU cooler that came with the Optiplex 3040. For whatever reason, Dell decided to solder the mounts to the back of the case, but anyway, I broke those off to get enough room to put a aftermarket backplate on it, only to find out that Hyper 212 Evo did not fit. So I was getting a little anxious and worried that I wasn't going to be able to fit the side panel on the computer case anymore. So I went out and bought this guy, which is 127 millimeters in height. So that came in clutch. It also allowed enough clearance for me to use both sticks of RAM, so I was very happy with that as well. And our 8GB upgrade stick from TimeTech is also in there, right next to the CPU cooler. So moving on to the left-hand side of the case here. So this exhaust fan looks exactly the same as the previous one, but this is a Cooler Master 80mm fan instead of the Dell Optiplex default one with this rainbow-ass cable on it, which is ugly as sin. So I've decided to use a sleeved cabled fan here just to clean the thing up a little bit. So if we move down over here where the power supply is, we actually managed to fit the SFX power supply, the SF600 from Corsair, into this computer. Now, unfortunately, the fan is sticking upright. I would have liked it to have it facing down so I could put a vent hole in the bottom. and some feet on the bottom of the computer case just to get a little bit better airflow. But believe it or not, this guy fit without any modifications to the case. So if we move over to the back side of the power supply and case here, I'm just going to remove the power cable real quick. So these two screws fit without a single problem, believe it or not. I could probably add the third one, but I don't have any washers on me. And the reason why the third one is out is because the screw bottoms out on a component, so that obviously wouldn't be good if I turned the power supply on with a screw bottoming out on an electrical component. Could cause a short, so that wouldn't be good. So we're just using the two screw holes here for now. So I'm going to plug that guy back in. We're going to need that. So let's next focus on the absolute rat's nest that's in the bottom of this computer. So as you can see, it don't look pretty. But this is the only way I managed to get it to work, believe it or not. So yeah, there's not much to say about that. I just kind of crammed everything in there. I couldn't really cable manage the way I want to do so, but luckily the windowed side panel covers most of it, so you don't see a lot of it. There's also the intake fan that I put on the front panel of the computer, so that worked out quite well. I have that hooked up to a fan splitter, as well as the rear exhaust fan that's hooked up to a fan splitter as well, because there's only two fan headers on this computer's motherboard for whatever reason. There's only the CPU cooler, and then there's the rear exhaust fan header, so I had to use a fan splitter for that guy. Moving on up and following the cables, we have the Samsung 860 EVO, and it is double-sided tape to the front panel of the computer. Luckily, there's no moving parts in an SSD, so you can do that no problem with an SSD. With a hard drive, wouldn't really recommend double-siding taping a hard drive to any surface because it's obviously got moving parts. So that is the Dell Optiplex 3040 in a nutshell. So I'm going to get the side panel here on the computer. It requires me to use two hands now that everything's such a tight fit. So I'm going to quickly throw this side panel on here, and then we're going to give this guy a test boot. So I'll be right back. Power supply's on, side panel's on. We're ready to give the thing a test boot. So let's see if it works. So we're going to hit the power button here, and I'm going to mash the F12 button to get into the BIOS to see if all the RAM and whatnot is being recognized. So let's hit the power button. Okay, everything's spinning up. Forgot to mention I added LEDs on it. So I'm going to just mash the button here. Come on, baby. Yes, I see the Dell logo. All right, let's go into the one-time boot option menu. Okay, we're there. So you know what? I'm going to go into Windows. So we're just going to hit OK on the Samsung 860 EVO. Come on, SSD boot. Yes! Oh, yes! Oh, finally, you're finally finished. Oh, we're on the desktop. MSI Afterburner's going to get angry at me because I have no internet connection right now on it. But we are finished. Oh, okay, so we're going to do Control-Shift-Escape. Bring up the task manager, go to performance and memory, and we have 16 gigabytes of DDR3 memory. Yes, you're finally finished. I'm so happy with how it turned out. Just look at that thing. It looks so good. I'm so happy with it. Oh, yes. Actually, you know what? Let me turn up the lights. Let's see what it looks like without the lights on. Yes. Yes, that looks nice. I'm very happy with that. So with that test boot out of the way, everyone, that is going to conclude the video series on the Dell Optiplex 3040. Finally, man, what a journey this thing has been through. For me, pulling it out of the garbage, to resurrecting it with a $50 used motherboard I found on eBay, to cutting a hole in it and then upgrading it with gaming components. Finally. I actually don't know how well this thing actually runs because I haven't benchmarked it yet. Maybe I should do that in a video in the future. So maybe we won't close the door on the 3040 just yet. We got one more video to do on this thing maybe. If you guys are curious to see how well this mini guy can run, let me know in the comment section below. I'd be more than happy to film a benchmarking video on this little guy. I'm actually curious to do some benchmarks for it myself. So this project was actually pretty fun to do. It was time consuming though, don't get me wrong, it was very time consuming because I had to figure out the measurements of the case, what to cut, what not to cut. Obviously, I mentioned earlier the components were definitely a big pain in the ass to figure out what was going to fit in this computer case, what wouldn't. Luckily, I came across this GTX 1070 Ti yesterday on my searches through Kijiji. I usually just kind of scroll through it every once in a while to see if I can find some good parts on it. And luckily, I came across this guy for $410. I worked my way down on that guy for the price from like $480 to $410. And so it was the cheapest one in my area. And I was actually quite happy with that deal because people want some astronomical amounts of money for a 1070 Ti's and 1080 Ti's on the internet. So yeah, don't given to the scalpers. They're kind of ridiculous for the old GTX 10 series cards. But overall, other than the parts fitting inside the computer, the cable managing was the most difficult thing, I would say, because the cables that come with the SF600 are very stiff. They're not very flexible. So the cables were giving me quite a difficult time in trying to maneuver them and get them where I needed to be inside the computer case. So that's why it kind of looks like a rat's nest in the bottom of it. So maybe when I get the time and money on my own time, I'll buy some braided cables because they're a little bit more flexible for the SF600 power supply. And then I'll re-cable the entire computer here and make it a little bit nicer on my own time. Other than that though, I had a lot of fun doing this project, and I would probably recommend someone to do this if they had the same case design as the 3040 here. I'll leave all the measurements that I did for the cutouts in the description below, so if you guys need a point of reference, you can use that for your mod if you're interested in doing so. That was another time-consuming thing, is I had no points of reference. I had to figure everything out on my own. So other than that, yeah, this project was very fun, and I was actually very happy to see the final results of this mod. Other than that, I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video. That's going to conclude the video here. Hit that like button and that subscribe button if you guys want to see more content like this in the future. I'll probably end up benchmarking this guy regardless, but other than that, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. My name's Ken, also known as Wiltshire, and I will see you guys, as always, in the next video. See you later, guys.